talking to Georgina Hall, who's a consultant genetic counsellor. Georgina works at the Genetics Eye Clinic at St Mary's Hospital and Manchester Royal Eye Hospital. So Georgina, to start with, how would somebody go about arranging for a genetic test?
Okay, so somebody could ask their ophthalmologist about genetic testing. So genetic testing is now available across the NHS, and ophthalmologists are able to order genetic tests. So providing somebody has had the ophthalmology examinations where retinal dystrophy is suspected, their ophthalmologist may talk to them about genetic testing in order to confirm that diagnosis. If somebody isn't under a regular ophthalmologist, then they can go to ask their GP, for example. So any health service can refer into genetic services. So they can ask to be referred to genetics, and it's likely they'd be seen in a genetic eye clinic where they would have their eyes examined to confirm that retinal dystrophy is the suspected diagnosis, to make sure that we're doing the right test. So we would examine somebody. It's often important to get some sort of photographs and to kind of understand what's happening in the eye to help us interpret the genetic result when it comes back. So we would do the ophthalmology, and then we would be able to talk about genetic testing if somebody wanted to consider that as well.
Okay, so if somebody decides to go for it, what's then involved in the actual testing process?
So the test itself is usually done with a blood test. So our genes are in all the cells of our body, and inside those genes, that's what we want to have a look at. So we usually go for a blood test, but occasionally we can do it on a saliva sample, but mostly it's a blood test. So that side of things is fairly straightforward, the blood test, but I guess the important part is making that decision and understanding exactly what the test is and what the test is going to be looking at and what it might mean. So we have now in the NHS a sort of formal consent process that will make sure you have a chance to talk through, I guess, the family implications of having a genetic test. What might that mean, not just for you, but also for your family, to talk through the different outcomes of the tests. We may find something, we may not. What the test mean? And so you have a chance to really think through what that test is going to mean for you. The test itself takes about 6 months to get the result back. So currently in the NHS, we're using a technology called whole genome sequencing. So as we've talked about, retinal dystrophy isn't just one gene. There are lots of genes that can cause the condition. And in the old days, we used to sequence, that means read the DNA code of just one gene at a time. But for a condition like retinal dystrophy, where there are lots of genes, that's not a very effective way of doing the test. And now in the NHS, the most cost-effective way, in fact, is to sequence the whole genome. So that means all 20,000 genes, the coding parts of the genome, and all the DNA in between the coding genes. So it's a very large kind of test that picks up a lot of data. But then what the laboratories then do is then they just hone down into the retinal dystrophy genes to analyse those genes, the code of those genes in detail, to try and find the genetic cause for the condition.
And where do genetic counsellors fit into this process?
So as genetic counsellors, we've got a lot of experience in helping people think about genetic testing, make decisions about genetic tests, think about their family and what the implications might be. So we're here for people at any stage during the process. Some people may come up to see us before they've had a genetic test to talk about the test, if they've chosen to be referred, or if their ophthalmologist recommends that. If perhaps the ophthalmologist hasn't had so much experience in testing, they may think it would be good to come through to genetics. So we might see somebody before a test, or we may see after a test to talk through the results. So if we get a more uncertain result, for example, an ophthalmologist might refer into genetic services to help us understand that result and make sense of that result for people. Or if people have questions about their family, wanting to understand the inheritance, family members, ophthalmologists may then refer into genetic counselling at that stage. But I think it's just important to know we're here at any stage of the process for any questions that might feel helpful.
And all of these services are available on the NHS to people with inherited retinal conditions, which family members would be eligible to access genetic services?
So family members are eligible to come to see us. So if you've got a genetic condition in your family and you've got questions about that and questions about the risks, then go and talk to your GP. You're eligible to be referred. If we meet a family member at the beginning, we'll want to draw together a family tree. We'll want to understand who in the family has the genetic condition, and we'll probably need a bit more information about that family member. We can't offer genetic testing to family members unless we know what the gene change is. So it's like a needle in a haystack. We wouldn't start with a family member and just start trying to look for something and we don't know what's there. We always need to start the genetic testing in the person that's got the retinal dystrophy, and then if we can find the gene change, we can then offer testing to other people in the family. If it's relevant, it might be that they're not at risk of that gene, depending on how it's inherited, but we would want to explore the family and help answer those questions.
Thanks very much, Georgina.